Well, hi there, everybody. I'm Jeff Mayers from wispolitics.com and wisbusiness.com. And I'm here to start our September 8th program, part of our trade policy initiative, Wisconsin-style diplomacy in a pandemic-influenced world, how strong international relationships and trade lead to economic growth. This is part of our trade policy series at wispolitics.com and wisbusiness.com. We have a lot of great sponsors and partners who are helping us with this. This effort includes a page at wisbusiness.com about international trade, and it also includes 4 events. This is the third of the 4 events for this calendar year. I want to thank our sponsors for this programming, the Wisconsin District Export Council, and Michael Best Strategies. Event partners include the International Practice Section at the State Bar of Wisconsin, the Center for East Asian Studies at UW-Madison, the World Trade Association at MMAC, and the Madison International Trade Association. And one of our special event partners is the Wisconsin Technology Council, and that's led by Tom Still. And Tom Still is the president, and he's going to be moderating today's program. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you, Jeff. Great to be here. And thanks again to our sponsors and the other partners in this endeavor. That's great.
Okay, so I'm going to exit and I'm going to leave it up to and your special guest. So
all right,
take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, to everyone watching, thanks for joining us today. You know, we're fortunate to have 2 former U.S. ambassadors with us today that I'm going to tell you a little more about in a second, but it's kind of in keeping with the Wisconsin tradition, especially somewhat recently. You know, I was thinking about other ambassadors from Wisconsin and you know, some kind of recent memory. Pat Lucey, the former governor of Wisconsin, was an ambassador to Mexico. John Teft was in Russia. Steve King and Rick Graber were both in the Czech Republic, and I'm sure I'm missing some, but and especially farther back in history, but it goes to show that Wisconsin has that kind of history, that kind of background in terms of its involvement in international affairs and diplomacy. So with us today, Mark Green. Mark is a former member of Congress from the Green Bay area. He was an ambassador to Tanzania, which is really a critical part of the world. And an administrator for the U.S. Agency on International Development, USAID. He's now president and CEO of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, which is a nonpartisan forum that takes on global issues, and so it's great to have him with us. Also here, Tom Loftus. Tom is a former Assembly Speaker, served in the Wisconsin Assembly from Sun Prairie originally, was ambassador to Norway. And he's also been a UW regent, and he has another hat that he wore at one time when he was a top advisor to the World Health Organization when Groen Harlem Brundtland was directing that. So some great background there. By the way, both are former candidates for governor, although not against one another. So I don't think there are any old scores to be settled here today. So we'll get right into it. So what we're going to do for the benefit of those who are watching, we're going to hear from Mark and Tom in terms of some opening remarks, and then we'll get into a conversation with some questions that I might pose, and then we'll also have some questions from members of the audience who are really appreciative of this opportunity today to talk to 2 former ambassadors who've been there, done that, and are still very active in the kinds of things that they're up to. So I think we're going to lead off with Mark, if I recall our agenda. So welcome.
Great. Thanks, Tom. And hello, Tom. Good to see you again. And I must say that I owe a real debt of gratitude to Tom Loftus. When I was nominated to be ambassador, Tom was one of those who was very helpful to me in understanding some of the opportunities and tools that you have as an ambassador, and was very helpful indeed. And I know that he's making the same offer as am I to Tom Baird, who I think will be a terrific ambassador. I'm looking forward to him taking his post. So 20 years ago, Labor Day, 20 years ago, Labor Day, President George W. Bush spent almost that entire day in Kaukauna, Wisconsin. And I remember we did the classic things that you do as a politician. Come Labor Day, we went to the apprenticeship hall and, he did this big show of hanging up drywall and all of that good stuff. And I remember traveling with him back to the airport, Austin Straubel, so we could get back on Air Force One. And I barely knew him at that point. I'd met him just in passing. And I asked him what he wanted to work on. And I remember he said, well, I want to work on education reform. I want to work on energy reform. I want to work on tax reform. And of course, 8 days later was 9/11. And I remember seeing President Bush again in October. And when I saw him and shaking hands, I said, Mr. President, remember that drive in Kaukauna? And he looked at me and he said, yeah, green, blown clear out of the water. And I said that because it's a reminder to us, even during times of domestic challenge and different issues that we need to take on, we cannot forget about or ignore what takes place in the far corners of the world. It's true in a negative sense in terms of threats from abroad, but it's also true, more to the point for today, on the opportunities that are there, the enterprise-driven opportunities in particular. When I was sworn in as ambassador, I did something somewhat unusual. I wasn't sworn in at the State Department. I wasn't sworn in at Congress or at the White House. I was sworn in at a farm just outside Green Bay. And I did that because I wanted to convey that I hope to bring Wisconsin values with me in the work that I did diplomatically. The values of hard work and economic opportunity and trying to create opportunities. When I became administrator of USAID, I actually laid out a framework for our work that we call the journey to self-reliance. It was the notion that you could work around the world helping to lift people up by creating opportunities and addressing capacity limitations, oftentimes rules and regulations, and work with them to build capacity to create opportunities, good for them and good for us. And really, I'm trying to carry that with me to the Woodrow Wilson Center. Now, the Wilson Center is actually part of the Smithsonian. We are in part government enshrined. All of my program leads are government employees. We're fiercely independent, fiercely nonpartisan, and we work to develop approaches to American leadership around the world. And in so many ways, it is about enterprise, and it is about trade, and it is about commerce. And I think it's important that we're having this session today because I worry a great deal that somehow trade has become a dirty word, that somehow commerce has become a dirty word, instead of looking at it for what it is, which is the opportunity to help others rise, but also to build opportunities for our own entrepreneurs and also develop real mutually important alliances. And I think that has never been more important than it is right now. So I think this represents opportunities both abroad, but back here at home. And so I look forward to today's discussion. And again, those values and those good citizens we see in Wisconsin, I think we need to bring more of that with us around the world. Tom?
All right. Well, thank you, Mark. And, and by the way, we're going to soon have a new member of the Ambassador Club from Wisconsin, Mayor Tom Barrett from Milwaukee and Luxembourg. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Ambassador Loftus.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Wiz Politics, Wiz Business. My old friend, Mark Green, good to see you. Just to set the stage, a United States ambassador represents the president, and you're actually given a letter from the president that says part of your job is to tell the president what he doesn't want to hear. Right. Ambassadors call this reporting facts on the ground. So it's important when we talk about Tom Barrett. Yes, he's with the Secretary of State, but he's there to represent the president. And it's a very powerful position where you're able to act on behalf of the president and your country. Luxembourg is an important country, a member of NATO, a member of the European Union, The International Court of Criminal Justice, I believe, is in Luxembourg. It's a banking center. I'm affiliated with a Norwegian firm, and our bank is in Luxembourg. And you have to keep in mind that Switzerland is not a member of the European Union, and this brings Luxembourg's role up quite a bit in the international banking. Tom Barrett will be the third ambassador from Wisconsin to Luxembourg. And he has two very famous predecessors, Joseph Davies in the late 1930s, who was Roosevelt's ambassador to the Soviet Union later, and John Cudahy Jr. from Milwaukee, who was in Luxembourg when it was invaded by Nazi Germany. Luxembourg also has a very strong Wisconsin connection, because when you go to Belgium, Wisconsin, Luxembourg, Wisconsin, and Ozaukee County, this is where those Luxembourgese who did immigrate ended up: Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota. And there's a cultural center there that handles relations for Luxembourg, especially in a program for people who want to reclaim Luxembourg citizenship because of a grandparent or parent. Interesting to note, Luxembourg has a new ambassador to the United States, a young woman. Her first trip outside of Washington, D.C. was to Luxembourg, Belgium, and Ozaukee County, Wisconsin. And so Tom, I think, will have a great deal of help in his term. Just a couple of things about our relationships with Europe. Germany has an election coming up. I think the future of America in Europe and the world, I would say in the world, depends on the outcome of that election and what direction Germany takes, especially as it relates to Russia. There is a gas pipeline called Nord Stream that is running between Russia and Germany underneath the Baltic Sea, bypassing Ukraine. And President Biden has just lifted his objection to this at the urging of Germany. And we'll see. But we have our relationships with Europe, I think, really on stage now with the German election and what happens in Ukraine.
Very good. Well, thank you, Ambassador Loftus. And we've already covered a little bit about one of the questions I had, which was Luxembourg and Mayor Barrett's role there. So while not the biggest country in Europe by any means, it's a strategic crossroads in a sense, especially economically, is what it sounds like. Ambassador Green, your thoughts on Mayor Barrett becoming ambassador to Luxembourg and the importance of that?
You know, it's interesting. The U.S. is quite unusual in that we have political, or technically speaking, non-career foreign service ambassadors. And I've always been one of those that believes that the right non-career ambassadors can be a tremendous asset. Oftentimes, the host countries are excited about getting non-career ambassadors because they believe they're getting someone who has the ear of the president. And that's, of course, important to them. But I think also someone like my friend Tom Barrett will bring naturally the strategic skills and the political skills that go along with being an ambassador and can help to message important themes to audiences in Europe. Secondly, even for those events and those developments that aren't directly in Luxembourg, he'll have a front row seat and he'll be able to provide analysis from his perch there that will be very useful to the State Department and to the Biden White House. So I think it's a great opportunity for Tom, and I think it's a great opportunity for the Biden administration. It's very good indeed.
Very good.
And Tom, as Mark knows, each embassy has a division of the Commerce Department that is there specifically to help U.S. business navigate. In Tom's case, it would be the European Union. And Wisconsinites should take advantage of that. I know that when I was in Norway, many business people visited, let's put it that way. Tommy Thompson came. This was shortly after we had ran against each other for governor, and I'm forever thankful for him beating me. But he came and we put on a dinner. We had heard that there was a Norwegian company that was looking for a site in the United States for a wood flooring factory. And we invited everyone from that company, the board of directors, the management, all spouses. We had a huge dinner. Tommy gets up and starts talking about Wisconsin as if it was the Garden of Eden at least. Darned if they didn't set up a place in Racine. Gives you an idea that you can use your connections as an ambassador to leverage the interests of the United States.
Absolutely. And you raise a very good point. Foreign direct investment in Wisconsin is very important to what's going on around the states in terms of its economy. You see dollars coming in, you see companies from outside the United States coming in, and it helps set up those kinds of pathways that people in Wisconsin can take advantage of. When you think about trade in Wisconsin in general, it's responsible for hundreds of thousands of jobs and a big part of the economy. We need to do a better job, I think, as a state and in terms of getting there. But you're absolutely right. These different embassies are portals for Wisconsin. Mark Green, some thoughts on that? I mean, I know you saw it in Tanzania. You've seen it in other roles.
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know Tom Loftus and I share this point of view. I don't think we take advantage of the extraordinary asset that we have in the University of Wisconsin system. That is something that trade partners are looking for, because it lets them know that the state has a commitment to investing in technology and also in workforce, that they'll be able to tap into the programs and initiatives that the UW system offers. So, yeah, I mean, we all know that for the average farmer in Wisconsin, if they can't export their crops, their produce, they might as well plow the fields under, right? 95% of the world's population is outside the United States. And yet we all too often talk as though, it's 50-50 or something like that. So, yeah, we need to be relentless in our pursuit of those trade relations. And as Tom Loftus said, the role that an ambassador can play in using those salesmanship skills, those diplomatic skills, those political skills, is a real asset that we should all take advantage of.
Yeah. And by the way, our export total in Wisconsin is roughly commensurate with our population ratio. We're about 20th in the nation. We're about 20th in exports, but I think there's a lot of potential to do even more. So let me get back to something Ambassador Green raised earlier, which is, of course, we're coming up on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We just came out of an episode in Afghanistan, which obviously very controversial, and the economy there in that country is kind of a mess from everything that's been reported. Yet Afghanistan is really in a key position strategically, especially as a trade route. And I think that goes back to ancient times, really. I mean, and so what can be done, perhaps through trade, to begin to normalize conditions there, normalize relations, perhaps with us, perhaps with others in that region? And I pose that to both Ambassador Green and Loftus.
It's a tough one, Tom, because Afghanistan, shorthand, it doesn't have oil or gas. Mm-hmm. It may be the crossroads of the Silk Road, but what they use that for is a toll road.
Right. Exactly.
And
subject to different factions within the country.
Right. The country has existed on foreign aid, NGOs employing people, the U.S. employing people. I don't see much opportunity in that area of the world for trade for the United States. Certainly Pakistan, Russia, and China. Yes, but it's a heavy lift for us.
Very, very heavy.
Yeah, so first off, my point of view on the withdrawal, I'm very concerned. I'm deeply concerned about the ramifications of this. I would invite everyone to go to the Wilson Center website. We started an initiative called Hindsight Up Front. My first program was with David Petraeus and Sir John Scarlett, who are co-chairs of our advisory council. H.R. McMaster did our second program. We did one with former ambassador to Pakistan, David Hale, last week, and looking at South Asia. But I think the ramifications of this are going to be felt for a long time. The UN Commissioner on Refugees is projecting 5 million Afghan refugees in motion. I do worry that it's going to affect the politics and the economics of a number of parts of the region, not only obviously in Central and South Asia, but in Europe. And I worry that we're going to see a new surge in some of the populist politics that have been, quite frankly, corrosive and really hurt transatlantic relations. So I'm very concerned about that. On the economic front, directly with Afghanistan, there are precious minerals there. And thus, I would note, as the US and the UK and others pulled out, China and Russia have not closed their embassies in Afghanistan. And China and Russia both abstained from the recent UN Security Council resolution. I think they are moving quickly to try to cut deals with the new government. Not that we're in Wisconsin in any position to take advantage of it anyway. Quite frankly, that's not generally our economic interests. But it is worrisome to me, and I think it bears watching. It could have some real repercussions that affect the countries in the region. And also in budgetary terms, the humanitarian assistance needs in Afghanistan are monumental. The U.S. is by far the largest humanitarian donor in the world, and 2, 3, and 4 added together don't equal what the U.S. does. And you take this on top of the catastrophe, the tragedy of Haiti, and I think this is going to have some real budgetary impacts. One area in which I'm concerned, putting on my old hat of USAID, which led humanitarian assistance and development assistance, some of those development tools that we all rely upon to reinforce rule of law in countries and to try to create platforms and frameworks for investment. We look at foreign assistance trends, actually humanitarian assistance is sharply up. And as a result, development assistance is beginning to slide significantly. There's only so much money and one's beginning to cannibalize the other. So that's something for us to be concerned about. You know, we all know when it comes to foreign assistance and foreign policy and relationships, still the greatest foreign assistance program that there is private enterprise. Mm-hmm. That is what our partners in other countries are looking for. They're not looking for government handouts. They are looking for opportunities to grow themselves and to create real jobs and the kinds of jobs that a young generation aspired to. Afghanistan, you have remarkable achievements in education, particularly for girls and women, opportunities that they did not have previously, and sadly, opportunities they may not have, at least to the same extent going forward. That's really what we want to do, is we'd like to find ways to invest in those small startup operations, business operations. But sadly, I think we're going to be hard pressed. It'll be a long time, I think, before the U.S. Public sector or private sector will see a situation on the ground that is stable enough and conducive to investment. So it is very concerning.
Right. Well, and moving ahead, how does this splash over, per se, into U.S. relations, both diplomatic and trade related, in the rest of the world? Is the president irreparably harmed by this, or is this somewhat transitory as we begin to reform or re-energize some of the historic alliances that have been out there? Obviously, there's the EU in terms of what needs to be happening there, and of course, the Pacific Rim. So let me start with Ambassador Loftus on that. How is this, what happened in Afghanistan going to affect those other parts of the world and U.S. standing?
Well, as Lincoln said, you're captive of your history. This is now part of our history.
Mhm.
I think that the Soviets were there. They fell, they folded, they went home. The British were there. They went home. Those were episodes in the history of those countries that, quite frankly, did not have a long-range impact.
Right.
I think that what we will see is whether or not we can contribute to things by holding Pakistan to a higher standard than we have in the past. And as regards China, was that diplomatic enough, Tom? As regards China, we have to have a united front. We have to have Japan, Germany, Australia, New Zealand. We have to have a united front with China, and we'll see if that happens.
Right. Well, that was a point that Tom Friedman from the New York Times made in a column just this morning about a united front will be needed as we navigate what's going on in China, both in terms of security and trade. Ambassador Green.
So there are several different sets, I think, of repercussions. First off, my own view is that certainly the way the withdrawal was handled was a mistake. In the Afghanistan study group that produced the report that most people point to as a path out of where we were. And I do think that idea of having a modest presence in Afghanistan, conditions-based, but as a way of being a capacity builder, I do think that was the right answer. Nonetheless, the president chose a different path, as the commander-in-chief certainly is within his rights to do. Going forward, there were a couple of different things. I do think there are some hard feelings in Europe. There are questions about whether or not the U.S. paid sufficient attention to the coalition presence, European presence largely. At the beginning of this year, there were twice as many coalition troops in Afghanistan as American. And I think we sometimes forget that. And so I think there are some hard feelings there that need to be soothed, and the president can do that. I think it's really important to reinforce those alliances. I'm a believer that part of America's superiority in terms of the great power competition is the fact that we do have alliances, that we do have coalitions of the willing, that we do work together with partners, trade partners and democratic partners. And I think that's a key asset that we have. I think this is a good time for us to go back and reinforce those. I also think that it's important for President Biden in coming weeks to show clear resolve when it comes to some of the security threats and some of the tests that may come our way in that region. He's still a relatively new president. As we know, some of our rivals in the world are always looking to test new presidents. And I suspect that there may be additional tests coming our way. And I think it's important for President Biden and his team to show clear resolve. I think they understand that. I'm not saying anything that they don't know themselves, but I think that's going to be very important as well.
Well, on Mark's very good point, Afghanistan was a NATO operation, and all of these NATO countries, including Luxembourg, including Norway, had troops there. Norway had F-16s. They all had to do their own saving of their troops and their helpers. So we go back to the German election, and here we're confronted one more time. Why weren't we consulted more as a NATO member? Look at us now, another 5 million refugees coming our way. Are we to open our borders one more time? So Mark is right on, he's spot on that this repair of relations with our NATO allies regarding this particular incident should be number one on the agenda.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's worth noting in my own conversations with people who served in Afghanistan or the region, they do say that in terms of hardworking individuals, Afghans are right up there. They note that's just kind of embedded in them. So that's worth noting as we move ahead and think about these refugees. Let me turn to differences between this administration and the previous administration around how they viewed trade. The Trump administration was more about unilateral agreements, meaning the United States and one other country, and it was obviously pro-tariff in a lot of ways. The current administration may turn back to multilateral agreements. I don't know if that's clear yet, but what are your thoughts on that? And I'll start with you, Ambassador Loftus.
Well, I think that as it relates to China and trade, that to use a overworked term, there needs to be a reset at the moment. Not only the idea that we need partners in this, but we have to rethink the tit for tat tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
In my own experience dealing with the University of Wisconsin system of late, we can see that there is a barometer of what is happening, and that Chinese students at UW-Madison, usually around 3,000, have gone down. There's about 380 or 90,000 Chinese students in US universities, most of them in big public universities. These universities rely on these students because they pay full tuition. The other thing is that they don't stay. Their visas are to get an education, then they have to go back to China. If there's some hope, is that we have a great number of alumni of many universities in the next generation of leaders in China. I don't see so much hope at the moment because China has a view, we have a view, and there needs to be a breakthrough of some sort. What that is, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. By the way, it's interesting. A neighbor recently showed me a 1914 University of Wisconsin yearbook. There were Chinese students there. You could tell with the names in the pictures, which is interesting how long that's gone on. Ambassador Green, same question.
Sure.
Unilateral and multilateral, and what's going to be the approach?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that the Trump administration, Ambassador Lighthizer, certainly focused much more on bilateral trade deals. And the one exception being a good exception was USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada agreement, which recently marked its first anniversary of implementation. Been a terrific success. And in fact, we did a program where we had all three trade ministers together talking about the opportunities that come with that. But largely, they looked at trade as a series of one-offs. And unfortunately, that doesn't present great opportunities in most cases for American entrepreneurs. They need the scope of market, right? They need broad markets sometimes to get the economies of scale. So I support good multilateral trade deals. I'm a little concerned that while the Biden administration would like to do multilateral trade deals, I'm not sure the atmospherics are there right now. It's a great lift. It's a great challenge. I'm pleased with their trade agenda, what they're hoping to do, but I think it's a bit uphill. Back in my day in the House, and I was there when we passed some trade deals, we had usually most Republicans supporting trade deals and enough Democrats for it to be bipartisan. I worry that critical mass on both sides of the aisle has gone away. And so I think getting trade deals done is a heavy lift. What is interesting, though, people say that they're worried about trade. Politicians say that they oppose trade, but they're all about critical supply chains. So they don't like trade, but they're worried about, increasing nearshoring and working on critical supply chains. So I think while the term appears to have some political sting, I think unjustly so, I do think that there are opportunities. They may not be the sweeping trade deals that we would like to see. They may be more focused on individual sectors. So maybe that's the road that we'll see. So China, obviously, as we know, is heavily invested in most parts of the world. I spent a lot of my time in Africa, well-known Chinese investments in Africa. But something important to point out to American audiences, the reason that African countries, most often cited reason for African countries to embrace Chinese investment is because America isn't there. I hear it over and over again. Look, we want to do deals with the U.S. We're looking for investment from the U.S., but you're not there. Mm-hmm. On us. And this is a multi-administration challenge. I don't think we've done as good a job as we need to do in looking for ways to create opportunities. And also remember that Africa is a very young continent, youngest continent by far. And, this is an opportunity to make good investments in Africa, green investments in Africa that not only will create opportunities for American producers and manufacturers, but I think also help us all take on important challenges. So there was an interesting statistic that if we see reductions of 40% in the U.S. and Europe and Canada and Japan in greenhouse gas emissions, but Africa continues to grow in its emissions at the same rate that a country like India does, then all of the savings and the pain of our belt tightening will be more than offset. So it is in our interest, our selfish interest, to make solid investments, clean investments, technology-driven investments in many of these markets, and we really need to embrace that. Final thought, a friend of mine who runs the Kissinger Institute here, Robert Daly, a very, very good China hand. He said, American politicians make a mistake. They assume that the Chinese are 10 feet tall. He said, they're not 10 feet tall, right? They are not invincible. They're not all powerful. We need to understand differences in our systems and adjust our policies accordingly. So authoritarian countries, governments can always move money faster than democracies. That's the way it has always been. But we offer something in terms of transparency, that we want to leave something behind, that we want countries to rise. We want them to be self-reliant. We want them to move from being donor recipients to trading partners to fellow donors. That's the beauty that we have. That's the opportunity that we have, is to contrast our point of view and our approach to China. So, I think sometimes we think that we need to match China dollar for dollar everywhere in the world. This is not the case. What we need to do is listen to our partners and see what it is that they need and see how we can help them help themselves. Every country in the world, every community in the world, they want to be self-reliant. They want to be sovereign. They want to take on their own challenges. Our system, done right, can help them get that to that place. And China has a very different calculation.
Very much so. And again, it all comes back to partnership. And of course, it involves Canada and Mexico, which happen to be Wisconsin's #1 and #2 trade partners. So that's very important. Now, the president just today, we just talked about energy a little bit. The president just today said, hey, we'd like to get to like 45% solar by the middle of the century. And at the same time, most of the solar panels net right now are produced in China. And yet, then there's all the kind of supply chain issues that you raise as well. So looking ahead to all of that, how can we really reinforce innovation in this country in the rebuilding of the supply chain? The Senate has passed the United States Innovation and Competition Act, which was really kind of formulated around endless frontier, but maybe didn't include some of the things that it should have included from endless frontier. So let me start with Ambassador Loftus on that, and then get back to you, Tom.
Well, I guess just-in-time inventory has its time is over. I think that there will have to be a new thinking in the industry about supply chains, which should bring more, at least warehousing back into the United States. As far as solar panels and the rest, they still depend a lot on government subsidy, and especially the pass-through subsidy from monopolized utilities. As long as that keeps going, I think that we will be able to do what the president has in mind. If you're in Europe, you have a national security reason to do solar and wind and biomass. Germany only has coal, for example. It doesn't have oil or natural gas. When I was in Norway, Norway was the world's 3rd largest exporter of oil, and pretty much it all went to Europe. So they have a different reason, which is probably more important than government subsidies. They still have the subsidies, but if they want to be independent of the gas and oil giants, which are basically Russia and others, they have to go in this route. And again, this will be part of the German elections. You can do nothing better than to just read as we go along here about what the issues are there, including what is the role of NATO now, and will there ever be another out of area NATO adventure?
Exactly. And one of the core questions I think, and Ambassador Green, you kind of raised this or touched on it, for entrepreneurs here in Wisconsin and elsewhere, it's all about innovation. It's all about policies that can stimulate innovation. Do you think from what you know about the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act, it will do that? Or do you think that we need to really reinforce that somewhat more? Endless Frontier seem to be more targeted in that way than this current act, which seems to be a little more about cybersecurity, which is obviously important as well. Your thoughts on that?
So first off, we've seen possibilities. So if you look at Operation Warp Speed, which produced these game-changing, life-saving vaccines in record time, that's a sign of what can be done with investment in technology, investment in research. I think President Trump, the Trump White House, did an extraordinary job of moving the bureaucracy and also making sure that things were carefully sequenced so you didn't have wasted time along the way. But also, let's not forget, if President Trump had simply said on a Tuesday, yeah, we're going to go make vaccines, and that was the first effort that there had been in the research in that industry, we'd still be waiting for the vaccines. The fact that we had seen years of research in science, in medical science in particular, is what made all of this possible. So we need to make sure that we are investing, yes, in our public universities, yes, in broad-based medical research and science research. That's really what positions us to exploit opportunities and to mobilize bureaucracies and get to where we need to be. Secondly, I think we have to do a better job of awakening to the opportunities around the world. 80% of all the lithium in the world comes from 3 countries in South America. Asia and South America, our neighbors, same neighborhood. So we need to unleash, I think, our diplomats all around the world in identifying opportunities and really building those economic relationships in places that may not seem to most Americans as being immediate opportunities. We need to be in this for the long run. We need the U.S. to lead in economic leadership, enterprise diplomacy, as I call it, broad-based. China is famous for its 100-year horizon as it takes a look at investments. We tend to be very impatient. We have very short horizons. I used to say when I served in the House that I was one of those people who could tell you when the end of the world was. The end of the world was the first Tuesday in November in an even numbered year. Sadly, that's the way that politicians are trained to look at things. What we have to understand is that we need broad-based investments in our economic advantage, which is our public universities, our science and technology startups, in our entrepreneurs in those fields, and understand that this is a long game that we need to play. I think some of it's in the clean energy side, clearly a top priority of the Biden White House, and good for them really championing that. But we need to make sure that we invest in all of these fields and that we do so in a serious way, and that we do so even if there isn't an immediate economic return.
Sure. Let me turn now to some questions from our viewers. And thank you both for this conversation thus far. I think it's been really illuminating and it's going to add to a lot of things. Some of these questions are kind of localized in a way, which you wouldn't expect, right? And you're both from Wisconsin. You understand Wisconsin. You understand the big cities and the small towns in Wisconsin. So the kinds of questions that are a couple that I noticed are, how can chambers of commerce outside of major metro areas build better international relationships that can help their small businesses? What 3 steps can county economic development groups use to help their businesses find these kinds of markets? And again, we're speaking internationally. So your thoughts on that from your experience, both abroad and here. Tom.
Well, I think going through the embassy, if you're at a county level, you're going to get a very friendly reception from the Commerce Department. And if you're going to do something as complicated, let's say, as dealing with the European Union, a good place to access that would be Luxembourg. Chambers of commerce, each country has an American Chamber of Commerce. And these are businesses that do, American businesses that do business in that country. Typically, they are very large corporations. Each country has their own parallel Chamber of Commerce of companies in that country that do business in America. These are entry points. And there is a program in the State Department and through the Commercial Service that will walk businesses through regulations, red tape, will even set up meetings for you and arrange at your expense, but arrange for transportation. I hosted in Norway many of the type of delegations that you're talking about. And under a State Department program, I was able to host them and then they could pay. But it was a big deal to be at the American ambassador's residence and meet your potential commercial and business partners. Don't do it yourself. Have a friend.
Very good. I know just from our own experience at the Tech Council, I've spoken to probably 20 or so different delegations from different countries around the world over time. I think, Tom, actually, you probably organized a couple of them. And it's valuable. I mean, especially for people who are on the ground here. Mark, your thoughts. How can people in chambers of commerce, counties, wherever, better connect?
Well, it's really doubling down, I think, on what Tom's just said. So almost every embassy has a commercial attaché, commercial officer, and understand that it's not that they are doing you a favor. You're doing them a favor. Their job is to advance economic investments and relationships. Oftentimes, they simply don't know what they have. And so I think it is important to reach out to those embassies, talk about what it is that you have, that what it is that you bring to the table, and then let them go to work for you. I do think trade delegations are a good idea. I think trade delegations, I don't think people recognize or realize that in many parts of the world, personal relationships and face-to-face relationships are essential. They're very, very important. So I do encourage trade delegations. It makes sense to me. Also, something that Tom began with, I think is important. You know, there are parts of the world where we have a deep history. Milwaukee and its German heritage. Exploit that. It's something that our German partners are very proud of. So look at those places where we already have some historic ties and cultural relationships and exploit that. That's a way of getting face time. That's a way of getting in the door. So I think there's a lot there. And remember, in the case of Wisconsin, we have a number of well-known brands in our economic and in our business community. Use those. Those are brands that people recognize everywhere in the world. And when you talk about the state of, let's say, Trek bicycles, that's something that gets attention and I think is also worth exploiting.
Indeed.
Well,
No,
Tom, if I can add,
please.
One thing people do not think about that much are the UW alumni clubs and associations in these countries. We have an alumni association in Beijing, Singapore, South China, Shanghai, and Taipei. That means all of these people have gone to the University of Wisconsin, are back home, are in business. Many of them are in law firms. In fact, I had dinner in Shanghai with a UW alumni who was a lawyer with, I'm not going to mention the firm because I might make a mistake, but these are important entry points as well.
They are. And with all of the UW grads who are scattered around the world, as you say, it's really quite formidable. A couple of other questions that are somewhat related. How are Wisconsin politics perceived outside here, both nationally and internationally? And I'm going to say, if at all. I'm not sure that maybe they are at all, but if they are, how are they perceived, and how does that affect trade opportunities? And just in general, I think with the atmosphere, both nationally and in the state, could more bipartisanship around some of these issues really help in terms of fostering trade and better relations? So, kind of related there. Ambassador Green, why don't you start with that one?
Sure. Well, first off, I think much of the world looks at our politics across the nation and scratches their head a little bit. The tone and tenor of political debate in this country is not where it was or where it should be. And I think that is not helping us around the world. We export an image of being a country attuned to human liberty, human dignity, and democratic and economic opportunity. And some of the debates that we've seen and some of the bickering that we've seen doesn't help to polish that image. And that's not good. But secondly, I guess more to the point, and remember that I served as ambassador in the developing world. I served in East Africa. And so when people in East Africa and Tanzania thought about the US, with due respect to both political parties, they don't think about the White House. What do they care about the White House? They thought about Coca-Cola. They thought about American products. They thought about American entertainment, music, and movies. And so I think there are cultural parts to our image that are even more important in many ways than the give and take of politics, whether it be the politics in Wisconsin or the politics in DC. We're not helping ourselves, to be very clear, but in many parts of the world, people still look at this country as the land of opportunity. That's why my parents came to the US from Europe and South Africa. And I think that it's economic opportunity. It's some of the great contributions to culture that have been made. That in many ways, I think, is more important to them.
Mhm.
I would agree with Mark. I think that the knowledge of Wisconsin as a place or a state is minimal. It's our politics that are understood by most people to be a bit dysfunctional. Of course, the luxury of Norway is that my grandparents came from there, and as did many others. And there was a knowledge of Wisconsin. There were some programs, the Marshall Plan and others that were still remembered. But I think that America as a political beacon, it's a tough sell these days. If we could get back to some modest bipartisanship, that would reverberate around the world. One of the great things for Africa, and I know Mark was involved, was that when George Bush was president, he started an HIV/AIDS program that was fantastic. I was with the World Health Organization at the time, and something like this improved the image of the United States a great deal. It's easy to say things should be more bipartisan, and it takes work. But until there is something like that, I don't think the image of Wisconsin or any other place will be that good.
Mhm.
Tom, if I can just make one quick addition, one thing I think will be helpful when we get in a better place in COVID, we'll also see more cultural exchanges. I think we'll see the ramping up of the Peace Corps presence around the world. And in many parts of the world, that Peace Corps volunteer, whether he or she be a teacher or a nurse, that's far more important to them. And that's about the best diplomatic energy that we can provide. So I look forward to that day. That will be helpful.
Yeah, and you both raise excellent points. I mean, whether it's the Marshall Plan after World War II, the formation of NATO, the joint effort around the Cold War, and things like the Peace Corps. These are these are bipartisan efforts, and hopefully there's a chance to get back to some of that and what it does around the world. Very quickly in closing, and this is not the happiest of questions, but one of the audience members says, "I am concerned about future terrorist attacks on our embassies. Are you?" We only got a minute left, so.
Well, embassies are under a law that was passed not that long ago, that they are to construct themselves and their personnel to avoid terrorist attack. And in the letter from the president to ambassadors, there's this scary sentence that says the ambassador is personally responsible to prevent terrorist attacks in his or her embassy. That'll help.
So Tom, still, let me just add very quickly to that. So of course, I served at an embassy which had sadly known a terrorist strike.
Correct.
My residence was actually the embassy for a short period of time during those terrible days. There's some tension there. I agree with what Tom's saying. I worry that ambassadors, USAID administrators, given the stern message that they've received, that doesn't help them getting out to the places where they need to get. And so I think that there's a discussion that needs to be had. We can't do our jobs very well if we're stuck behind embassy walls. And I know it's creative tension But that's something that needs to be addressed.
All right. Well, thank you both. I want to thank both Ambassador Green, Ambassador Loftus for your service to the country and also to the state over time. And it continues in so many different ways, officially and unofficially. So I think people are very appreciative of that and very appreciative of you being here today. I want to thank Jeff Mayers and the entire WIS Politics and WIS Business crew for being a part of this. And our sponsors today, Michael Best Strategies and the Wisconsin District Export Council. So a lot of partners in this who are trying to shine a light on some things that are very important to Wisconsin's future. So thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.